Comreg seeks your views on the measures to support equivalent access to and choice of electronic communication services, or ECS, for people with disabilities. What is Comreg? The Commission for Communications Regulations, Comreg, is a statutory body responsible for the regulation of the electronic communication sector and the postal sector in Ireland. These areas we regulate include telecommunications. This means electronic communication services, or ECS. And networks, including a fixed line telephone service, a mobile phone service, a broadband service, radio communications and broadcasting transmissions, and the postal sector. We operate under Irish and EU legislation in the following areas. We are responsible for facilitating competition in each of these sectors, protecting consumers, and encouraging innovation. We deal with complex issues of law, economics, and technology. We make sure we make our decisions fairly and clearly give a reason and an explanation as to why. We want to offer a high level of protection to consumers, including consumers with disabilities. Including with this, we deal with suppliers. We make sure information is clear. And we address the needs of specific social groups, in particular, people with disabilities. We want to make sure that you can choose and use electronic communication services with confidence. In this context, ECS means a fixed line telephone service, a mobile phone service, a broadband service. It can also include a service to make and receive calls, telephone service or a voice service, or broadband services like VoIP, also known as voice calls over broadband, where you have access to telephone-like services through your broadband provider. These services can then be accessed through a home landline telephone, a broadband connection, or a mobile phone or a handset, for example, a home landline telephone. General consumer protections in place protect consumers' interests. Consumer protection involves setting rules to ensure that customers, including those with disabilities, can have easy and equivalent access to ECS, and that they are armed with the information they need to engage with the market with confidence. These protections support all consumers, including those with disabilities, to choose and use ECS with confidence. In addition, we introduced specific measures back in 2014 and 2015 to assist in ensuring that people with disabilities would have the same support to access and choose ECS, the same as those who don't have disabilities. We want to make sure that service providers of ECS or networks offer people with disabilities a service equivalent to that enjoyed by the majority of end users. This means that people with disabilities should have the same access to and choice of ECS as people without a disability, while being mindful of the principle of proportionality. Access to ECS should be the same for people with disabilities as it is for people who don't have disabilities. Everyone should have easy and equivalent access to ECS services and related information. For example, people with disabilities should benefit from the same usability of ECS and related information, the same as other users of the services, even if the way they use these services differs. That is what we mean by the word equivalence in this context. The measures. Comreg has imposed specific measures on service providers under the legal framework. These measures specify that providers must supply accessibility statements for end users with disabilities in their comreg decisions, and other measures to ensure equivalence of access under comreg decision. Some undertakings are obliged to provide access to a text relay service, the Irish Text Relay Service, or ITRS for short, as set out in that comreg decision. The measures assist in ensuring ECS services and information are accessible to all, including those with disabilities. In 2014 and 2015, we carried out a number of public consultations with the aim of ensuring people with disabilities would benefit from the easy and equivalent access to and choice of ECS, the same as most people. Following these consultations, we identified the following specific services and requirements in relation to information as necessary and appropriate to assist in ensuring that people with disabilities did not face barriers in making full use of their ECS service and information. So, an accessible complaints procedure, accessible top-up facility for prepaid mobile phone users, accessible directory inquiries, accessible billing, accessible facility to test compatibility of terminal equipment or having an appropriate returns policy, facility for disabled subscribers to register their requirements, provision of a text relay service, accessible information, requirement for an accessibility statement. We discuss these measures in more detail in section 4. You will find a series of videos on our website summarising these requirements. What is this consultation about? We are reviewing the effectiveness of the measures we summarise in paragraph 17 above. The measures are discussed in more detail in section 4, page 12. We want to check if these measures meet the needs of people with disabilities when choosing, assessing, and using ECS, engaging with their service provider, and throughout the consumer journey. And we want to assess whether people with disabilities are adequately protected. In the time since the measures have been implemented, the following has happened. The electronic communication sector has continued to evolve in terms of market and technological advances. The European Electronic Communications Code, the EECC, or the Code, brought about a change to the legal framework governing ECS and ECN. The Department of Environment, Climate and Communications published the Electronic Communications Code Regulations 2022, also known as the ECC Regulations. This means that these regulations are part of our national law in Ireland, effective from the 9th of June 2023. The objective of the ECC regulations is to ensure equivalent access and choice of ECS and ECN for people with disabilities. Well-functioning markets should maximise benefits for consumers, ensuring that everyone, including people with disabilities, has equivalent access to ECS in terms of choice, price, and quality. As stated above, we consider that the existing general consumer protection rules and new consumer protections in place under legal framework will help protect consumers, including those with disabilities, to choose and use electronic communication services with confidence. We know that sometimes people with disabilities may need extra support to effectively access and use electronic communication services, including customer service. We have taken measures as set out in paragraph 17 above and in more detail in section 4 to support people with disabilities in their access and use of ECS and related information. Service providers must ensure that the specific accessibility services and information at paragraph 17 are available to end users with disabilities, and information as regards accessible services and information is published in the accessibility statement as set out in the call for inputs. The measures we put in place to make sure that people with disabilities enjoy the same level of access and use of ECS as most people, and to help them avoid obstacles to access to and use of ECS. This summary document refers to Chapter 4 of Call for Inputs, which presents our current observations on how well existing measures are working. We based our observations on our ongoing engagement with stakeholders, including industry, user groups, groups representing people with disabilities, consumers, and other regulators. In compiling the call for inputs, we reviewed any relevant issues in the measures, including looking at the legal basis, inputs from our forum, and a published report by the body of European regulators for electronic communications around equivalence and choice of ECS. Through our call for inputs, we are looking for input from people with disabilities on the following: their experiences of ECS, their experience of the specific services and support available to them as set out at paragraph 17 above, their experience when choosing and using ECS, how they engage with their service provider, and their consumer journey. With respect to equivalent access to and choice of ECS as set out in the call for inputs, the review of the measures may identify the following: A potential improvements to the existing specific services and support available to people with disabilities. B, possible new specific services or information may be necessary and appropriate. And C, that the needs of people with disabilities as regards choosing and using ECS are being met by technological developments and the market. In this case, some or all of the existing specific services and supports for people with disabilities may no longer be necessary to ensure equivalent access and choice of ECS, and the extra services or support under the measures could be withdrawn. The 22 questions posed in the call for input, and these are repeated in the summary documents. There is a question posed to address each of the measures, and each question for each measure asks the following: are these measures still required? Are changes needed to make sure that these measures are relevant to people with disabilities? Do these measures help ensure equivalent access to and choice of ECS and related information? The call for inputs is one of a number of data gathering methods that we are using to gather relevant information to be considered when forming the basis for any future consultations or publication. The call for inputs proceeds as follows. Chapter 2. Introduction and background to the measures. The statutory and regulatory framework. Overview of previous work and engagement as contributions to the call for inputs. Chapter 3. This outlines the trends and developments that may impact outcomes for end users with disabilities as regards access and choice of ECS. Chapter 4. A review of the measures, specific services and support in place for end users with disabilities. Considers the effectiveness of the measures, the scope to clarify, update, or withdraw any of the required measures, and the potential for introducing any new measures, new specific services and support to ensure equivalent access to and choice of ECS.